Welcome to Sleepless Ancient Odyssey. The day is done. It is time now to let the noise of your world fade into silence. Find your most comfortable position, and for the next few moments, simply relax. Tonight's Odyssey is about to begin. Tonight, we journey to the dense jungles of Mesoamerica, where stone pyramids pierce the canopy and time itself was written in glyphs. You will witness the rise of one of history's most sophisticated civilizations. You will walk among astronomers who mapped the heavens with breathtaking precision. And you will discover why a thriving empire seemingly vanished into the green embrace of the forest. This is not merely history. This is the story of humanity's eternal quest to understand time, destiny, and our place beneath the stars. Whether you are here for a story to captivate your mind, or a grand narrative to accompany you to sleep, your journey starts now. If you enjoy these odysseys, subscribe and join us every time we travel to the past. Now, let us begin. The jungle breathes. It has always breathed, long before humans carved their first stone, long after the last temple fell silent. Vines climb ancient walls. Roots crack through plazas where thousands once gathered. The howler monkeys call at dawn, as they have for millennia, their voices echoing through mist that clings to pyramid peaks like the ghosts of prayers. This is the Yucatan Peninsula. This is Guatemala. This is Belize, Honduras, El Salvador. This is the land of the Maya, though to call it simply land feels insufficient. It is a living manuscript, written in limestone and obsidian, in jade and blood, in calculations that tracked the movements of Venus with accuracy that would not be matched for 1,000 years. Walk with me now through the forest near Tikal. The year is 1848. Your boots sink into soft earth. Above you, the canopy forms a cathedral of green, filtering sunlight into pillars of gold and shadow. You are searching for mahogany trees, or perhaps ancient treasures. You are not prepared for what waits ahead. A shape emerges from the vegetation, too angular to be natural, too massive to be dismissed. You push through hanging curtains of moss and suddenly the jungle opens. Before you rises a mountain that is not a mountain. It is a pyramid, taller than the trees themselves. Its limestone blocks fitted so precisely that even after centuries abandoned to the forest, they hold firm. Stairways steep enough to make your heart race climb toward the sky. At the summit, a temple. Inside that temple, rooms where priests once stood and looked out over a city of thousands. You are not the first to find this place. The Maya knew it. They built it. They walked these plazas. But for reasons lost to time, they left. And the forest, patient and eternal, swallowed their creation whole. This moment of rediscovery is happening all across the Maya world in these years. Explorers, archaeologists, treasure hunters, and dreamers are pulling back the green curtain to reveal pyramids and palaces, ball courts, and observatories. Each discovery raises more questions than it answers. Who were these people? How did they build such monuments without metal tools or beasts of burden? Why did they obsess over time, creating calendars within calendars within calendars? And, most haunting of all, why did they abandon these magnificent cities? The Maya did not leave behind a simple story. They left behind a puzzle written in stone and starlight, in blood and beauty. To understand their disappearance, we must first understand their rise. We must walk through their cities when they thrived, must listen to their priests calculate the end of ages, must feel the weight of time as they felt it, pressing down like the humid air before a storm. So let us turn back the centuries. Let us watch as the first farmers clear plots in the forest. Let us see pyramids rise stone by stone. Let us learn to read the calendar that governed their lives and whispered of their doom. The jungle remembers. And tonight, so shall we. Before the great cities, there was maize. Before the pyramids, there were fields carved from the jungle. The three sisters planted together, maize and beans and squash, each feeding the others, each making life possible in a land that offered both abundance and challenge. The Maya emerged not from a single point but from the forest itself, it seems. Villages formed in the pre-classic period, more than 3,000 years ago. These were not primitive people struggling in darkness. They were farmers and potters, traders and storytellers. They looked at the sky and saw patterns. They looked at the seasons and saw cycles. And somewhere in those early centuries they made a decision that would define their civilization. They decided to measure time itself. Other cultures counted days. The Maya counted days, months, years, and vast sweeps of time that stretched beyond human comprehension. They created what we now call the long count calendar, a system so sophisticated that it could mark any day in a cycle lasting over 5,000 years. Imagine the audacity of this. Imagine farmers in simple villages deciding that they needed to track not just the planting season, but epochs, eras, the very breath of creation. The long count began, they believed, on a day we would call August 11th, 3114 BCE. Why did they do this? We can only imagine the conversations in those early villages. Perhaps a priest noticed that the movements of Venus repeated in precise patterns. Perhaps a farmer wanted to predict not just the next flood, but floods in the distant future. Perhaps there was something deeper, a spiritual understanding that time was not a river flowing in one direction, but a wheel turning forever, death and rebirth, destruction and creation, all ordained by the gods and readable in the stars. By the time the classic period began, around 250 CE, the Maya had transformed their calendar into something more than a tool. It was a theology. It was a science. It was the obsession. Cities rose: Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, Palenque, Caracol. Each competed for power and prestige. Each built temples higher than the last, reaching toward the sky where the gods dwelt and the planets moved in their eternal dance. In these cities, an entire class of scribes and priests dedicated their lives to watching the heavens, recording observations, calculating when Venus would rise as the morning star, when the moon would eclipse the sun, when the cycles would align in ways both auspicious and terrifying. They carved their calculations into stone monuments called stelae. These were not simple markers. They were declarations of power, records of kings, and maps of time itself. A stela might commemorate a ruler's birth, but it would place that birth within the vast cycles of the long count, showing how this one human life connected to the turning of ages. The Maya saw time as divine. Each day had its own character, its own god, its own destiny. The calendar they used for daily life, the Tzolk'in, consisted of 260 days, each with a unique combination of number and name. This calendar interlocked with the Heb, a solar year of 365 days. Together, these calendars created a larger cycle of 52 years, called the calendar round. When 52 years passed, time in a sense reset, and special ceremonies marked this dangerous transition when the old time ended and new time began. But even this was small compared to the long count, which stretched across millennia, tracking creation itself. In the cities, life organized around these temporal rhythms. Priests emerged from temple darkness to announce auspicious days for planting, for war, for marriage, for sacrifice. The common people working in the fields or the workshops lived their lives according to calendars they could not fully read, but trusted absolutely. The calendar was fate. The calendar was the voice of the gods written in mathematics. And this brings us to a crucial understanding. The Maya did not fear time. They revered it. They believed that by understanding time's patterns, they could align themselves with cosmic forces, could ensure prosperity, could maintain the delicate balance between the human world and the realm of the gods. But cycles, by their nature, include both ascent and descent. And the Maya knew this better than anyone. Let us walk now through Tikal in its glory, perhaps in the year 700 CE, when the city stood at the height of its power. You enter from the south, following a raised causeway that cuts straight through the jungle. The path is smooth, made of white limestone plaster that gleams in the afternoon sun. On either side, the forest has been pushed back. Fields of maize stretch toward the horizon. Cacao groves cluster near streams. The air smells of wood smoke, cooking corn, and the ever-present humidity that makes your skin glisten. Ahead, the city rises like a mountain range made by human hands. The first thing you see are the pyramids, impossibly tall, their sides steep stairways climbing toward the sky. Temple. I rises 154 feet above the plaza, its roof comb decorated with carved figures and painted in brilliant reds and blues. Across the great plaza stands Temple Diu, too, nearly as tall, its facade adorned with stucco masks of gods whose names you do not know but whose power you can feel even from this distance. The plaza itself bustles with life. Thousands of people move through the space. Merchants from distant cities spread their wares on woven mats. Jade from the highlands, obsidian from volcanic regions, cacao beans that serve as currency, salt from the coast, feathers from tropical birds so vibrant they seem unreal. You hear a dozen languages, or perhaps just different dialects of the same tongue, flowing together like water. Musicians play. Drums made from hollow logs pulse with a heartbeat rhythm. Flutes carved from bone sing high and haunting. Somewhere nearby, a ball game is being played, the rubber ball echoing against stone walls as players use their hips to keep it aloft. This is not mere sport. This is ritual. This is the cosmic struggle between light and dark made physical, and sometimes when the stakes are highest, the losing team will give more than pride to the gods. You climb the steps of one of the pyramids. Each step is tall enough to require effort. By the time you reach the summit, your legs burn and your breath comes hard. But the view steals what little breath remains. Before you spreads the city of perhaps 60,000 people, one of the largest urban centers in the ancient Americas. Residential compounds cluster around the ceremonial core. Some houses are simple, thatched roof structures built on low platforms. Others are elaborate palaces with multiple rooms, courtyards, and walls painted with murals showing lords and ladies in splendid regalia. Beyond the city center, the forest has not been completely tamed. It surrounds Tikal like an ocean surrounds an island. But even in that forest, people live. Farmers have their scattered homesteads. Villages dot the landscape. This is not an empty wilderness. This is a managed landscape, shaped by human hands for centuries. Inside the temple where you stand, the darkness is complete except for the flicker of torches. The air is thick with copal incense, the sacred resin that carries prayers to the gods. A priest emerges from the inner sanctum. His body is painted blue. His teeth are filed to points and inlaid with jade. His earlobes stretch long with heavy ornaments. He is marked by his service to the divine, set apart from ordinary people by costume and by knowledge. This priest can read the glyphs carved into the stone. He can tell you that this temple was built by Jasaw Chan Kawil, the 26th ruler of Tikal, who defeated the rival city of Calakmul and ushered in a golden age. He can show you inscriptions that record not just the deeds of kings, but the movements of planets, the completion of calendar cycles, the sacrifices offered to maintain cosmic order. The Maya worldview was one of balance. The gods required nourishment, and that nourishment came from humanity. Blood was sacred, the most precious offering, and rulers pierced their tongues or their flesh to provide it. In return, the gods maintained the cycles of time, ensured that the sun rose, that the rains came, that the world did not collapse back into the primordial chaos from which it had been drawn. This was not cruelty. This was responsibility. The kings were intermediaries between the human and divine realms. Their bloodlines connected them to the gods themselves. When they died, they were buried in the hearts of these pyramids, surrounded by treasures, accompanied by servants, sent to the underworld Xibalba to negotiate with the lords of death and then rise again like the sun, like the maize god, in eternal cycles of death and rebirth. At Copan, far to the south, the scribes gathered in a building we now call the House of Writing. Here, the most learned men of the civilization studied texts painted on bark paper folded into books we call codices. They debated the meaning of astronomical events. They calculated when the cycles would align. They taught the next generation to read and write the complex script of glyphs, each symbol a combination of sound and meaning, capable of recording history and prophecy with equal precision. At Palenque, in the humid lowlands, architects designed palaces with towers for astronomical observation. They built aqueducts to manage water, created sophisticated hydraulic systems. They understood engineering in ways that continue to impress modern experts. This was the Maya world at its peak. Cities connected by trade routes and political alliances. A shared culture bound by language, religion, and above all, by their understanding of time. They believed they had deciphered the universe's code. They believed their cities would stand forever, as solid as the stones from which they were built. But the calendar, which they had studied so carefully, held warnings they perhaps did not fully heed. To understand what happened to the Maya, we must understand what they understood. We must see the world through their eyes, where mathematics was magic and astronomy was theology. Imagine you are a young scribe in training at Copan. You sit cross-legged on a mat in a room lit by thin shafts of sunlight penetrating the doorway. Before you spreads a codex, its pages made from beaten bark covered in a thin layer of lime plaster. On these pages, glyphs march in neat columns, black and red against cream-colored background. Your teacher, an old priest whose hands are stained with ink, points to a series of dots and bars. This is how the Maya wrote numbers. 1 dot equals 1. A bar equals 5. 3 dots and 2 bars would be 13. But the true genius of Maya mathematics was not just in these symbols. It was in the concept they mastered that eluded many other ancient civilizations. 0. The Maya understood 0 not as absence, but as completion, as potential. They wrote it as a shell glyph, and with this tool, they could perform calculations of stunning complexity. Their number system was vigesimal, based on 20 rather than the 10 we use. This allowed them to count in ways that accommodated both the calendar and the cosmos. Your teacher shows you how to calculate the position of Venus. This planet, which they called Chak-Ek, the great star, fascinated Maya astronomers. They tracked its movements with precision, knowing that it appeared as the morning star for 236 days, then disappeared, then reappeared as the evening star for another 250 days before vanishing again. They knew the entire cycle took 584 days. They created tables predicting its appearances years into the future. But why this obsession with Venus? To the Maya, this planet was associated with war and sacrifice. When Venus rose as the morning star, it was considered a dangerous time, auspicious for warfare. Kings timed their battles to align with Venus, believing the planet would lend them its power. The moon received equal attention. Maya astronomers calculated the lunar month as 29.53220 days. Modern measurements give us 29.53259 days. The difference is less than 2 minutes. They achieved this accuracy through centuries of patient observation and mathematical refinement, each generation building on the work of the last. The Dresden Codex, one of only 4 surviving Maya books, contains tables tracking lunar eclipses. The scribes who created it could predict these events with accuracy that startles modern astronomers. They understood the Saros cycle, the 18-year pattern of eclipses, and used it to see into both past and future. But their greatest achievement was the long count calendar itself, that vast measuring stick laid against eternity. Each day was a bead on an infinite string, each year a single breath in the life of the gods. The calendar tracked time in units that grew exponentially. 20 kin made a yuinao. 18 yuinao made a tun, roughly a year. 20 tun made a katun, about 20 years. 20 katun made a baktun, nearly 400 years. When the calendar reached certain completions, the Maya held ceremonies of great significance. The end of a katun was marked with the erection of stelae, monuments carved with the date and the deeds of the ruler who oversaw the ending of that time period. These were moments of both celebration and anxiety. Time was ending. Time was beginning. The cycles turned. And here, perhaps, we find the first shadow crossing the Maya world, because embedded in their sophisticated understanding of time was a darker knowledge. They knew that cycles included destruction as well as creation. Their mythology spoke of previous worlds that had been destroyed, previous humanities that had failed. They were, they believed, living in the fourth creation, the world of the current sun, and this world, like the others, would end. The Popol Vuh, the great Maya creation epic, tells of the gods creating humans multiple times, each attempt ending in failure. First, they made people from mud, but these melted away. Then they made people from wood, but these had no souls and were destroyed. Finally, they made people from maize, and these humans could think, speak, and worship. These were the true humans, the Maya themselves. But even this creation was not permanent. The cycles of time would turn, and eventually another ending would come. The question was not if, but when. In the late 8th century, as the classic Maya civilization reached its zenith, the priests studied their calendars and saw something approaching. Not the end of the world, perhaps, but the end of cycles, the completion of patterns. And in the real world, beyond the temples and the calculations, pressure was building. The population had grown enormous. The cities required constant labor to maintain. The fields needed to feed tens of thousands. The forest that had once seemed infinite was shrinking. Game became scarce. The soil, worked for generations, began to show signs of exhaustion. But the kings and priests, focused on the celestial, may not have noticed the terrestrial warning signs. Or perhaps they noticed but believed the calendar, not the land, held the answers. The mathematics of eternity cannot stop soil from eroding. The movements of Venus cannot bring rain when the climate shifts. And the long count, for all its precision, could not prevent what was about to unfold. Something changed in the 8th century. The change was subtle at first, barely noticeable, like the first cracks in a limestone block that will one day crumble to dust. At Dos Pilas, a city in the Petex Batun region, the year is 761 CE. War has come. Not the ritualized combat timed to the movements of Venus, where kings captured kings and the cosmos required blood. This is different. This is desperate. Enemy forces surround the city. The people abandon their grand plazas and palaces. They retreat to the ceremonial center and build hasty fortifications using stones pulled from the very temples their ancestors constructed. Imagine the desperation. Imagine dismantling the sacred to build walls against the profane. The defensive walls go up quickly, crudely, with none of the precision that characterized Maya architecture at its height. They use stelae, those monuments to kings and time, as building materials. Inscriptions that took months to carve are turned face down, become parts of barriers that will not hold. Dos Pilas falls. The city is abandoned. The forest begins its patient reclamation. This was not an isolated incident. Throughout the Maya lowlands, warfare intensified. Cities that had coexisted for centuries, bound by trade and shared culture, turned on each other. The inscriptions from this period speak of raids, destructions, rulers captured and sacrificed. The stelae record not just triumphs, but disasters. Why? What sparked this cascade of conflict? The question haunts us because the Maya left no single explanation. They continued to carve dates, to record events, but they did not write treatises analyzing the causes of their civilization's troubles. We must read between the lines, look at patterns, piece together a story from fragments. The climate was changing. Paleoclimatologists drilling into lake beds have found evidence of severe droughts during this period. The rains that Maya farmers depended on became unpredictable. Years of plenty were followed by years of scarcity. The sophisticated agricultural systems that had supported large populations began to fail. Picture a farmer standing in his field of withering maize. For generations, his family has farmed this plot. The priest said the rains would come. The calendar said the seasons would turn. But the stalks are brown. The earth cracked. His children are hungry. In the city, the king demands tribute. The ceremonies continue. The gods receive their offerings. But the rains do not come. When crops fail, everything fails. Trade routes that carried luxury goods become avenues of desperation. Cities that competed for prestige now compete for survival. Warfare shifts from ritual to resource grabbing. The taking of captives is no longer about cosmic balance but about enslaving labor to work exhausted fields. The population had grown too large. The Maya had cleared vast sections of forest for agriculture. They had built terraces, managed wetlands, developed sophisticated methods to maximize yield. But there are limits to how much any landscape can support, especially when that landscape depends on regular rainfall and the climate betrays you. At Tikal, the grand city we walked through in its glory, trouble is visible by the late 8th century. Construction slows. New monuments become rare. The last dated stela at Tikal, Stela 11, was erected in 1869 CE. After that, silence. Not the silence of sudden catastrophe. The Maya did not disappear overnight. The cities did not burn in a single conflagration. Instead, they slowly, agonizingly emptied. Families left for smaller villages. Trade networks frayed. The temples, which had stood as mountains of human achievement, began to feel like monuments to hubris. Perhaps it was like watching a tide retreat. Slowly, gradually, the life that had filled these urban centers flowed away. The priests continued their observations, but with fewer students to train. The craftsmen still carved, but fewer people could afford their work. The rulers still claimed divine authority, but their power to command, to organize, to maintain the system, waned with each passing Khatun. In the southern lowlands, city after city reached its final date in the long count. Palenque recorded its last inscription in 799 CE. Copan, that jewel of Maya architecture and art, last dated its monuments in 822 CE. Caracol, Calakmul, Naranjo, one by one the record stops. This is called the classic Maya collapse, though collapse suggests a sudden fall. It was more like a long, drawn-out decline, a fading, a loss of the ability to maintain the complex systems that had defined the civilization at its height. The people did not die out. This is crucial to understand. The Maya themselves survived. But the classic pattern of life, the great cities, the astronomical observatories, the elaborate ceremonies, the constant construction of monuments to time and power, this could no longer be sustained. Some cities survived longer than others. In the north, in the Yucatan, cities like Uxmal and Chichen Itza thrived into the 10th century. They had access to cenotes, natural sinkholes that provided water even during droughts. They adapted, developed new agricultural techniques, formed new political organizations. But even these cities eventually fell silent, though not all at once, not completely. The Maya continued. They moved to smaller settlements. They dispersed into the landscape from which they had once carved their empire. The calendar continued to turn in their minds even as the great monuments crumbled. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they found Maya people still living throughout the region. They found cities, though smaller than the classic centers. They found people who remembered the glyphs, though fewer could read them. They found the calendar, still maintained, still tracking the days. But the Spanish, like the drought and the warfare and the exhaustion of the land, brought their own form of ending. They burned the codices, calling them works of the devil. They destroyed temples, built churches on their foundations. They brought diseases against which the Maya had no defense. The surviving books, the Dresden, the Paris, the Madrid, only escaped because they had been sent to Europe as curiosities before the full scope of the destruction began. The forest, meanwhile, crept over the pyramids. Vines wound through palace rooms. Trees split limestone blocks with their roots. The cities that had held tens of thousands became green mountains hiding their secrets under layers of vegetation and earth and time. And the question that echoes through the centuries: why? Why did such a sophisticated civilization at the height of its power begin to fade? Modern archaeology is a kind of resurrection. Layer by layer, carefully brushing away centuries of soil, researchers bring the Maya world back into the light. And each discovery offers new pieces of the puzzle, though the full picture remains frustratingly incomplete. In the 1990s, a team of scientists drilled into the sediment of Lake Chichancanab in the Yucatan. They were looking not for artifacts but for data, microscopic clues to ancient climate. What they found was stark. The sediment cores showed clear evidence of severe drought lasting from approximately 750 to 950 CE, coinciding almost exactly with the classic Maya collapse. But this was not uniform drought. The data suggested multiple severe dry periods, mega droughts that lasted years. Imagine not one bad season, but 5-10 years of insufficient rain. Imagine reservoirs drying up, crops failing repeatedly, the systems you depend on crumbling as water, the foundation of everything becomes scarce. Other studies have confirmed this pattern. Speleothems, cave formations that grow layer by layer, trap rainfall data in their structure. Analysis of these formations shows the same thing. The 9th century was dry, unprecedentedly so. Yet climate alone does not explain everything. Other civilizations have faced drought and survived. What made the Maya particularly vulnerable? The answer lies in how they had shaped their world. The Maya had built their cities largely without rivers. Unlike the civilizations of Egypt or Mesopotamia, they did not have the Nile or the Euphrates to provide reliable water. Instead, they depended on seasonal rains and sophisticated water management systems. They built reservoirs, channeled runoff, created artificial wetlands. These systems worked beautifully in normal times, but when the climate shifted, when the rains failed, there was no backup. The infrastructure they had built was optimized for abundance, not scarcity. Analysis of skeletal remains from late classic period sites tells another story, one written in bone. The people buried in this era show signs of malnutrition. Their teeth reveal periods of growth interruption during childhood, suggesting repeated famines. The average height of individuals decreased. Infant mortality increased. Even the elite, those buried in rich tombs, show stress markers. The population, it seems, had pushed past the carrying capacity of the land. Modern estimates suggest that some areas held population densities rivaling modern urban centers. All those people needed food, water, firewood. The forest that had seemed infinite was cleared faster than it could regenerate. The topsoil, thin in many areas, eroded when tree cover disappeared. The game animals, hunted intensively, became scarce. There is evidence, too, of political breakdown. The warfare in the terminal classic period was different from earlier conflicts. It was more common, more destructive, less ritualized. Inscriptions speak of cities being dissolved, a word that suggests not military conquest but political collapse. Without the ability to provide for their people, rulers lost legitimacy. Without legitimacy, the social structures that organized labor, maintained order, and coordinated the complex systems necessary for urban life fell apart. Some researchers point to the role of the elite themselves. The competition between cities had driven ever more elaborate building projects, ever more expensive ceremonies. Resources that might have gone to improving agricultural infrastructure or developing new technologies were instead poured into pyramids and palaces. The elite lived in luxury even as the common people struggled. When crisis came, the system had no flexibility, no reserves to draw upon. There are even theories about disease. Concentrated populations living in close quarters with inadequate sanitation would have been vulnerable to epidemics. While we have little direct evidence of disease, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Plagues may have swept through the cities, gone unrecorded or recorded in texts that did not survive. What becomes clear from all this evidence is that the classic Maya collapse was not caused by a single factor. It was a perfect storm. Climate change stressed agricultural systems. Overpopulation depleted resources. Political competition created instability. Warfare disrupted trade. Each problem fed into the others, creating a cascade that the civilization, for all its sophistication, could not stop. But here is where the story becomes more complex, more human. Because the Maya made choices during this crisis, they did not simply submit to fate. In some cities, there is evidence of attempts at reform. New agricultural techniques were tried. Systems of governance were altered. Some rulers seem to have responded by building more modestly, by trying to consolidate power in new ways. At Caracol, there is evidence that the elite residential areas were abandoned before the ceremonial center, suggesting a conscious decision to maintain public spaces even as private wealth collapsed. Other cities show different patterns. At some sites, the ceremonial centers were abandoned first, as if the people lost faith in the rituals and the rulers who performed them. The temples meant to connect earth and sky, to maintain cosmic order, stood empty while life continued in the residential zones, at least for a time. The Maya were not passive victims of their fate. They were people trying to understand what was happening to their world, trying to fix it, trying to adapt. Some succeeded, at least temporarily. Others failed. But all of them faced the question that haunts any civilization in crisis. How do we survive when everything we built our lives upon is failing? And underpinning all their attempts to understand, to respond, to survive, was the calendar. The cycles continued to turn. The long count ticked forward. The inscriptions, even in the darkest times, recorded the date. Time, at least, continued. Time was reliable even when nothing else was. But what does time mean when your civilization is ending? There is a question that has captured modern imagination, a question that in 2012 sparked both fascination and fear around the world. Did the Maya calendar predict the end? To answer this, we must return to how the Maya thought about time. The long count calendar, as we discussed, counted forward from a starting point in 3114 BCE. It moved through cycles within cycles, kin to Yuinao, to Tun, to Katun, to Baktun. 13 Baktun made a complete cycle, approximately 5,125 years. In 2012, on December 21st by our calendar, the long count reached 13.020.0.0.0. The cycle that began at creation was completing. A new cycle was beginning. To modern minds, especially those unfamiliar with cyclical concepts of time, this sounded like an ending. The end. Apocalypse. The Maya, with their sophisticated astronomy and mathematics, must have foreseen the doom of our world, right? Wrong. The Maya did not predict the end of the world in 2012. What they marked was the completion of a cycle, the turning of a great wheel. To them, this was significant, certainly. It was a moment worthy of ceremony. But it was not catastrophe. It was transformation, the old becoming new, death and rebirth. There is only one clear reference to 2012 in all surviving Maya inscriptions, a monument from Tortuguero that mentions the completion of 13 Baktun and describes it as when a certain deity would descend. But the inscription is partially damaged, the context unclear. It certainly does not describe global destruction. In fact, Maya inscriptions occasionally mention dates far beyond 2012. There are references to events billions of years in the future, calculated with the same precision they brought to all their astronomy. These were not predictions of things that would happen. They were demonstrations of mathematical prowess, exercises in pushing their calendar system to its logical extremes. The Maya understood that cycles repeat. After 13 Baktun came 14, then 15, and so on. Time was not a line marching toward an ending. Time was a circle, or perhaps a spiral, eternally turning, each rotation bringing both familiar patterns and new possibilities. But here is the haunting thing. While the Maya did not predict apocalypse, they lived through one. The civilization that had tracked time with such devotion could not stop time from bringing crisis. The calendars continued. The ceremonies were performed. The offerings were made. The priests calculated. The rulers declared auspicious days. And still the rains failed. Still the cities emptied. Still the monuments fell silent. One of the last dated inscriptions from the southern lowlands comes from Tonina, in what is now Chiapas, Mexico. What did the priests think as they recorded these final dates? Did they understand they were documenting an ending? Did they believe the calendar would be kept in the future, that someday the count would resume? The calendar outlived the cities. In the northern Yucatan, at places like Chichen Itza, the long count continued to be used into the 10th century. Then, even there, it faded. The Maya began using shorter calendar systems, the short count, which tracked only Katun cycles. It was as if they no longer had the resources, the stability, or perhaps the will to maintain the vast counting system that had once seemed so essential. But the calendar was not forgotten. The knowledge passed down through generations. When the Spanish arrived and burned the codices, some Maya scribes worked to preserve what they could. They wrote books in the colonial period using the Latin alphabet to record the knowledge that had once lived in glyphs. Books like the books of Chilam Balam preserved prophecies, histories, and calendar knowledge. In these colonial texts, we see the Maya still thinking in cycles. They recorded the Katun cycles and the prophecies associated with each. Katun 8 Ahau brought drought and famine, they said. Katun 2 Ahau brought the arrival of foreigners. Each 20-year period had its character, its destiny. Time continued to speak, even as the world had transformed beyond recognition. The Maya knew something we often forget in our linear, progressive view of history. They knew that civilizations rise and fall, that time brings both creation and destruction, that the wheel turns regardless of human wishes. Their calendar was not just a tool for tracking days. It was a philosophical statement about the nature of existence itself. And perhaps that is why the calendar survived when so much else was lost, because it spoke a truth deeper than any individual civilization. Time endures, cycles continue. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal patterns, indifferent to the pyramids crumbling below. The warning in the calendar was not about a specific date in the distant future. The warning was in the understanding that nothing lasts forever, that every peak contains the seed of its decline, that the cycles we track so carefully will turn whether we are ready or not. The Maya in their glory did not listen to this warning. Or perhaps they listened but believed their sophistication, their knowledge, their connection to the gods would exempt them from the fate of previous worlds. They built higher. They calculated more precisely. They offered more blood. And still, time brought them low. Let us imagine now a scene that might have occurred, though we cannot know for certain. It is the year 889 CE. The city is Tikal, though it could be any of the great centers approaching their end. An old priest climbs the steep stairs of Temple 4, the tallest pyramid in the city. His legs, which once took these steps easily, now struggle. He must stop twice to catch his breath. The sun beats down with merciless heat. There has been no rain for 6 months. The reservoirs are nearly empty. From the summit, He looks out over the city of his birth. The great plaza below is not empty, but it is no longer filled with the throngs he remembers from his youth. The market stalls are sparse. Many of the residential compounds show signs of abandonment. Roofs have collapsed. Courtyards are overgrown. Even in the palace complex there are empty rooms, silent corridors where once servants bustled and nobles conducted the business of power. He carries with him a codex, one of the sacred books painted by generations of scribes. Its pages contain astronomical tables, prophecies, the deep knowledge of the calendar. He has been keeper of this book for 30 years. He has added his own observations to it, calculating the movements of Venus and the moon with the precision his teachers demanded. But he has no students now. The young men who might have learned this knowledge are gone, left for villages where farming does not require as much water, where life is simpler, where the gods seem less demanding. The school where he once taught is silent. Dust settles on the benches. Spiders weave webs in corners where sunlight once illuminated pages of bark paper covered in glyphs. He opens the codex and looks at the date recorded at the top of one page. A date hundreds of years in the future, calculated by a scribe long dead. That scribe believed the calendar would still be kept when that date arrived, believed there would be priests to read it, cities to house them, civilization to continue the work of tracking time. The old priest feels doubt for the first time in his life. Not doubt in the calendar itself, but doubt that anyone will remain to keep it. The king, that divine intermediary between earth and sky, has not appeared in public for months. Rumor says he is dying. There is no clear heir. The noble families, once united in their service to the city, now quarrel over dwindling resources. He thinks of the creation stories, the worlds that ended, the humans made from mud who dissolved, the humans made from wood who had no souls. Is this, he wonders, another failed creation? Have the gods decided to try again? But he does not speak these thoughts aloud. Instead, he makes his observations. He notes the position of Venus rising before the sun. He calculates, using the tables in his codex, when the next significant calendar cycle will complete. He records it all, as precisely as he was taught, even though he increasingly suspects no one will read these words. This is not despair, exactly. It is duty. The calendar must be kept. Time must be tracked. These are the fundamental tasks, more important than cities or kings or even civilizations. The cosmos continues. The observations must continue. As the sun sets, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, he performs a small ceremony. He has no offerings of jade or cacao. He cannot pierce his tongue with a stingray spine to provide the sacred blood. He is too old, too weak, and such offerings now seem futile against the weight of what is happening. Instead, he simply speaks a prayer to the gods of time, thanking them for the knowledge he has been given, asking that it not be lost entirely. The stars emerge, those fixed points that have guided his people for millennia. He finds the planets, tracking their slow progress against the background of stars. Everything is as the tables predict. The mathematics of the heavens remain perfect. It is only here below, on this earth, that things have gone wrong. He sleeps that night in the temple, as he has for years. In his dreams, he walks through Tikal as it was in his childhood. The plazas full, the pyramids freshly plastered and painted, the sound of drums and flutes filling the air. He dreams of ceremonies perfectly performed, of kings who live forever, of rain falling in its proper season. He wakes to reality, to the struggling city, to the knowledge that cannot save them. But he wakes, also, to duty, and so he climbs once more to the observatory platform. He opens his codex. He watches the sky. He records what he sees. He maintains the calendar for one more day, one more kin in the endless count. Perhaps he is the last to do so in this city. Perhaps not. History does not record his name, does not tell us his story. But we know someone performed this duty because the inscriptions continue, sporadic but present, into the final years. The calendar outlasted the scribes who kept it, the cities that housed it, the civilization that created it. Because time, unlike humans, does not grow tired, does not lose faith, does not abandon its post. Time simply continues. While the southern cities fell silent, life continued in the north. The story of the Maya did not end with the classic collapse. It transformed, adapted, found new forms. In the northern Yucatan, cities like Uxmal rose to prominence in the 9th and 10th centuries. The architecture here was different, more ornate, covered in elaborate mosaics of stone. The palace of the governor at Uxmal stretches more than 300 feet long, its facade decorated with geometric patterns and mask panels so intricate they seem like lace carved from rock. Why did the North survive when the South collapsed? Water, primarily. The northern Yucatan is different geologically. The limestone bedrock is porous and rainwater drains through it to form underground rivers. Where these rivers approach the surface, cenotes form, natural wells providing reliable water access even during droughts. Cities built near cenotes had a lifeline the southern cities lacked. At Chichen Itza, the sacred cenote, a massive natural well, became the center of religious practice. Offerings were thrown into its depths: jade, gold, incense, and sometimes human sacrifices. Archaeologists dredging the cenote in the early 20th century found a treasure trove of artifacts spanning centuries, evidence of the enduring importance of this water source. But the North also changed in other ways. A new power arose, or perhaps arrived. The evidence is complex, sometimes contradictory, but it seems that around the 10th century, Chichen Itza was influenced by, or perhaps conquered by, people from central Mexico, possibly Toltec warriors. The art and architecture from this period shows a blend of Maya and Central Mexican styles. The Temple of Kukulkan, the famous pyramid at Chichen Itza, with its serpent shadows at the equinoxes, represents this fusion. The plumed serpent Kukulkan is the Maya name for the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl. The pyramid demonstrates sophisticated astronomical knowledge, its architecture designed to create specific effects at specific times. This is Maya science in service of a partially foreign theology. At Chichen Itza, the ball courts reached their grandest expression. The Great Ball Court stretches 545 feet long, with walls 27 feet high. Imagine the games played here, the rubber ball echoing off stone, the crowds watching from above. The carvings on the walls show the aftermath of games, captains beheaded, blood flowing in rivers that become serpents. This was sport as cosmic drama. Life and death made literal. But even these northern cities could not maintain themselves forever. Chichen Itza declined in the 12th century. The next great power was Mayapan, a walled city that dominated the Yucatan through the 13th and 14th centuries. This was a different kind of city, smaller, more defensive, less focused on monumental architecture. The grandeur of the classic period was gone. In its place was something more practical, less concerned with impressing the gods than with maintaining control. Mayapan itself fell around 1450, destroyed in a civil war. The Maya world fragmented into small competing kingdoms. When the Spanish began their conquest in the 1520s, they found not a unified empire but a patchwork of city-states, some allied, some at war, all vulnerable. The conquest was neither quick nor complete. The Maya resisted fiercely. Tayasal, a city on an island in Lake Chichen Itza, held out until 1697, making it the last independent Maya polity to fall to European control. For 175 years after the first Spanish contact, this city maintained its independence, a final echo of the civilizations that had built the Great Pyramids centuries before. But by then, the old knowledge was fading. The glyphs became mysterious. The codices, mostly burned, could no longer be read. The long count was no longer kept. The The Maya people remained, millions of them, but the specific civilization we call Classic Maya, with its cities and calendars and sophisticated writing system, had passed into history. Or had it? In isolated villages, in highland communities, in places the Spanish never fully controlled, traditions continued. The calendar cycles were remembered. The sacred almanac, the tzolk'in, continued to be used for divination and ceremony. Shamans, called daykeepers, maintained knowledge of the calendar's meaning, passing it down through generations. When modern anthropologists first began to work with Maya communities in the 20th century, they found this knowledge still alive, not written in glyphs on stone, but spoken, practiced, lived. The Maya had not disappeared. They had transformed, adapted, survived. Today, millions of people identify as Maya. They speak Maya languages, maintain Maya traditions, and yes, still use forms of the ancient calendar. The cultural continuity stretches unbroken from the pyramid builders to the present day. The cities fell silent. The glyphs ceased to be written. But the people endured, and with them, fragments of the old knowledge, the old understandings carried forward like seeds waiting for soil. The jungle kept its secrets for centuries. Spanish colonists knew there were ruins in the forest, but they had little interest in them beyond the possibility of treasure. The indigenous Maya knew, of course, but they did not write books that Europeans would read. Then in the 19th century, the world began to rediscover the Maya. In 1839, an American lawyer named John Lloyd Stephens and an English artist named Frederick Catherwood traveled through Central America. They were searching for ruins they had heard rumors of, cities lost in the jungle. What they found exceeded their wildest expectations. At Copan, they purchased the entire ruined city for $50 from a local farmer who owned the land. They explored temples and palaces, copied inscriptions they could not read, and marveled at the artistry. Catherwood made detailed drawings of the monuments, capturing them with an artist's eye for detail. Stephens wrote about their discoveries in books that became bestsellers. His prose painted vivid pictures. The city was desolate. No remnant of this race hangs round the ruins, with traditions handed down from father to son. It lay before us like a shattered bark in the midst of the ocean. Her masts gone, her name effaced, her crew perished, and none to tell whence she came. The publication sparked fascination with Maya civilization. Explorers, archaeologists, treasure hunters, and adventurers began to penetrate the jungles. Each expedition revealed more pyramids, more palaces, more inscriptions. The scale of what had been lost became apparent. This was not one city, but dozens, maybe hundreds. This was not a simple culture, but a sophisticated civilization that had flourished for centuries. But the glyphs remained mysterious. They could read the numbers, understand the calendar dates, but the rest was indecipherable. Theories multiplied. Some thought the Maya script was purely decorative. Others believed it recorded only astronomical observations and calendar data. The idea that it was a full writing system capable of recording language seemed impossible to many scholars. The breakthrough came gradually, pieced together by multiple researchers over decades. A Russian linguist named Yuri Knorozov in the 1950s demonstrated that the glyphs were phonetic, representing sounds, not just ideas. Despite working from photographs, never visiting a Maya site, he cracked key elements of the code. Others built on his work. Linda Sheeley, an art professor who fell in love with Maya civilization, helped organize workshops where epigraphers shared discoveries and collaborated on decipherment. The hieroglyphic stairway at Copan, the longest Maya text in existence with over 2,200 glyphs, began to reveal its story of kings and conquests. With the ability to read the inscriptions came a revolution in understanding. The Maya were not the peaceful astronomers earlier scholars had imagined. They were warriors, politicians, conquerors. They practiced human sacrifice. They engaged in brutal warfare. The inscriptions spoke of battles, captives, and ritual bloodletting. At the same time, the sophistication of their science became clearer. The accuracy of their astronomical observations, the complexity of their mathematics, the philosophical depth of their calendar systems, all this emerged from the translated texts. The Dresden Codex, one of the 4 surviving books, proved to be an astronomical masterwork. Its pages contained tables for predicting eclipses, tracking Venus, calculating the movements of Mars. The precision astonished modern astronomers. These were people working without telescopes, without computers, using only patient observation and mathematical genius. Modern technology has revealed even more. LiDAR, light detection and ranging, uses laser pulses to penetrate jungle canopy and map what lies beneath. Recent LiDAR surveys in Guatemala have discovered thousands of previously unknown structures. What seemed like natural hills were pyramids. What looked like empty forest contained roads, agricultural terraces, entire cities. The picture emerging is of a civilization far larger and more complex than previously believed. Population estimates have been revised upward multiple times. The environmental impact the Maya had on their landscape was profound. They transformed vast areas, managed forests, created agricultural systems of remarkable sophistication, and yet they could not sustain it. The rediscovery of the Maya has revealed not just their greatness, but their vulnerability. Every new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle of their collapse, but the full picture remains elusive. DNA analysis of ancient remains suggests the classic Maya population suffered severe bottlenecks during the collapse period. Chemical analysis of bones shows periods of starvation. Examination of settlement patterns shows the shift from urban centers to dispersed rural communities. The latest archaeological work focuses on resilience as much as collapse. How did some communities survive? What strategies did they employ? What can we learn from both their failures and their successes? Because the Maya are not merely history to be studied. They are present, living, continuing. And the questions their ancestors faced, questions about sustainability, about how civilizations adapt to environmental change, about the balance between growth and preservation, these questions remain urgently relevant. The ruins are no longer completely swallowed by jungle. Tourism brings millions to Chichen Itza, Tikal, Palenque, and dozens of other sites. The pyramids have been cleared, stabilized, studied. They stand now as monuments to human achievement and human fragility. And in the villages surrounding these tourist sites, Maya people go about their lives speaking languages that descend directly from the language of the pyramid builders, maintaining traditions that stretch back millennia, carrying forward a culture that conquered death, not by preventing it, but by transforming, adapting, enduring. What does the story of the Maya teach us, here at the far end of time from their great cities? First, that sophistication does not guarantee survival. The Maya were brilliant. Their achievements in mathematics, astronomy, architecture, and art rank among humanity's finest. They understood cycles of time that escape most of us living in the moment. They organized complex societies, built urban centers, created systems of writing and governance that worked for centuries. None of it saved them when the crisis came. Intelligence is not armor against catastrophe. Knowledge is not protection against the consequences of unsustainable growth. Second, that civilizations are more fragile than they appear at their height. When everything works, when the rains come and the harvests are abundant and the systems hum along smoothly, it is easy to believe that this is permanent, that your civilization has solved the fundamental problems and will last forever. The Maya, watching the stars wheel overhead in their eternal patterns, must have felt something similar. They had decoded the cosmos. They had built cities that seemed as solid as the earth itself. They had systems of knowledge passed down through generations. How could all this end? But it did end. Not overnight, not in a single catastrophe, but in a cascading failure where each problem fed into the next until the weight became too much to bear. The lesson here is humility. No civilization is too advanced to collapse. No knowledge is so profound that it exempts you from the basic requirements of survival: water, food, stability, sustainability. Third, that environmental limits are real. The Maya pushed their landscape to its breaking point. They cleared forests, exhausted soils, depended on rainfall patterns that proved unreliable. When climate changed, when drought came, the system could not adapt quickly enough. They had optimized for one set of conditions, and when those conditions changed, they found themselves vulnerable. We face similar challenges now on a global scale. Climate change, resource depletion, population pressure, these are not new problems. They are human problems, civilization problems, problems that have brought down societies before and could do so again. Fourth, that cultural continuity can outlast political collapse. The Maya cities fell silent, but the Maya people survived. The calendar continued to be kept, even if not in stone inscriptions. The languages evolved, but persisted. The traditions transformed, but endured. This suggests that civilization is not just pyramids and palaces, not just writing and mathematics. Civilization is also stories told by firelight, knowledge passed from elder to child, practices maintained because they give meaning and structure to life. This kind of civilization, lived rather than built, can survive catastrophes that destroy monuments. Fifth, that history is not linear. We like to think of progress, of constant improvement, of each generation building on the last toward some greater future. The Maya story reminds us that civilizations rise and fall, that knowledge can be lost, that sophistication can give way to simplification. The Maya had writing. Then they lost it. They had cities. Then they abandoned them. They had elaborate systems of government. Then they fragmented. It took them centuries to build these things. It took less than a century to lose them. This is not cause for despair, but for awareness. The things we take for granted, the systems we depend on, are not guaranteed. They require maintenance, adaptation, wisdom. They require understanding that growth cannot continue forever, that there are limits, that sustainability matters more than grandeur. Sixth, that endings are also beginnings. The classic collapse was terrible for those who lived through it. Cities emptied, knowledge was lost, population declined, but it was not the end of the Maya people. They survived, adapted, found new ways of living. The civilization transformed. Perhaps there is comfort in this. When systems fail, when civilizations collapse, it is tragedy. But it is not extinction. People endure. They carry forward what they can. They rebuild, different from before, but carrying threads of continuity from the past into the future. The Maya today live in the same lands their ancestors inhabited. They face new challenges, modernity, globalization, climate change, but they face them as Maya, with a cultural identity stretching back millennia. The pyramids their ancestors built stand now not just as ruins, but as reminders, links to a past that informs the present. Finally, that mystery remains. Despite all our research, all our technology, all our clever decipherment of glyphs and analysis of bones and drilling of lake sediment, we still cannot fully explain what happened. We have theories, evidence, probable causes, but not certainty. The Maya do not give up their secrets easily. Perhaps this is fitting. Perhaps some mysteries should remain. The pyramids rising from the jungle, stone monuments to time and human ambition, speak a language that transcends words. They remind us that we are small, that our lives are brief, that civilizations rise and fall like waves on a shore, but they also remind us that we are part of something larger. The people who built those pyramids, who watched Venus rise before dawn, who carved dates into stone believing someone would read them centuries later, they were human like us. They loved and feared, hoped and dreamed, struggled and endured. Their story is our story. Their warnings are our warnings. Their achievements inspire us. Their failures instruct us. and the calendar they created continues to turn, marking days that stretch far into the future, long after we who read these words have joined them in the past. The sun rises over Tikal. Mist clings to the pyramids, softening their edges, making them seem like mountains from a dream. Howler monkeys call from the canopy. Toucans flash brilliant colors between branches. The forest has reclaimed what it once yielded, covering the ancient city in patient green. 1,000 years have passed since the last inscription was carved here. 1,000 years since priests climbed these steps to observe the stars. 1,000 years since the plazas filled with people. But the stones, remember. They hold within them the calculations, the dates, the names of kings who believed they would live forever in stone. And perhaps they do. Perhaps memory is its own form of immortality. Tourists arrive as the day progresses. They climb the pyramids, carefully, breathing hard in the humidity. They stand at the summits and look out over the jungle that seems to stretch endlessly in all directions. They take photos, trying to capture something of what they feel, the weight of time, the presence of history, the mystery of a civilization that could build this and then walk away. Guides, many of them Maya, explain the history. They tell of the astronomers and the calendar. They speak of the collapse, the theories, the unanswered questions. They translate the few glyphs that tourists can see, making the ancient writing speak again after centuries of silence. In villages throughout the Maya world, far from the tourist sites, daykeepers continue their work. They consult the Tzolk'in, that 260-day calendar that has run continuously for thousands of years. They perform ceremonies on auspicious days. They guide community members through rituals that honor the old ways while adapting to modern life. The calendar has not stopped. The count continues, though few now track the long count as the ancestors did. The Baktun cycle that completed in 2012 has begun again. The universe did not end. It transformed, as it always does, as it always will. Scientists continue to study the Maya. Each year brings new discoveries, new pyramids revealed by LiDAR, new inscriptions translated, new theories proposed, new understanding of how sophisticated, how vulnerable, how human this civilization was. The Maya themselves, millions strong, live in the lands of their ancestors. They face challenges the ancient priests could not have imagined. Globalization, technology, climate change accelerated by industrial civilization. Yet they endure, carrying forward languages, traditions, and knowledge from a past that refuses to completely disappear. What would those ancient priests think if they could see their world now? The pyramids preserved, studied, valued not for treasure but for knowledge. The glyphs deciphered, revealing stories that had been silent for centuries. The people still here, still Maya, still connected to the land and the traditions. Would they see it as triumph or tragedy? Both, perhaps. The civilization they knew is gone. But the people endure. The calendar continues. The pyramids stand. And in that, there is a kind of victory over time itself. As night falls over Tikal, the stars emerge, the same stars the Maya astronomers watched with such devotion. Venus hangs in the western sky, brilliant in the gathering dusk. The moon rises, waxing toward full, traveling the path Maya calculations predicted centuries before it was born. The forest grows quiet. The tourists have left. The site is empty, as it was for centuries, as it will be again after closing hours tomorrow and the day after that. In this quiet, you can almost hear the echo of ancient voices, the chants, the drums, the calculations being recited in a language few now speak. Time flows like water through stone, wearing away even the hardest edges, but never stopping, never resting. The Maya understood this. They built their civilization knowing it would end. They tracked time knowing it would continue beyond them. They carved their stories in stone not because stone lasts forever, but because it lasts long enough to speak to the future. And it speaks to us now. It tells us we are brilliant and foolish, wise and blind, capable of measuring the universe and yet unable to save ourselves from our own success. It tells us that civilizations are mortal, but people endure. That knowledge can be lost, but also rediscovered. That endings are always also beginnings. The pyramids stand in the darkness, patient and eternal in their temporary permanence. Tomorrow the sun will rise again. The calendar will mark another day. Visitors will come and marvel and wonder and leave. The forest will breathe. The cycles will turn. This is the way of things. This is what the Maya understood. This is what their calendar taught them, and what their ruins teach us. Time does not stop. The count continues. The story goes on. And somewhere in the future, perhaps in another 1,000 years, other people will stand before these stones and wonder about us, about our civilization, about what we built and what we lost, about why we disappeared or transformed or endured. The calendar will still be turning. The stars will still wheel overhead. The mystery will remain, as it should, as it must. Because this is not just the story of the Maya. This is the story of humanity, of our quest to understand time, to leave our mark, to build something that lasts. The Maya built in stone. They calculated in stars. They wrote in glyphs that spoke across centuries. And in doing so, they became immortal. Not in the way they imagined, not as kings living forever, but as teachers, as warnings, as inspiration. The jungle breathes. The pyramids stand. The calendar turns. And the Odyssey continues, as it always has, as it always will, marking time until time itself has no meaning, until the last human voice falls silent and the stars wheel on alone. But that day is not today. Today the count continues. Today we remember. Today we learn. Today, like the Maya before us, we are alive in time, brief and brilliant, trying to understand our place in the cosmos, trying to leave something that matters, trying to read the calendar of our own existence before it runs out. The Maya could not save their civilization, but they saved something more important. They saved the knowledge that we are part of time, not separate from it. That we are both tiny and eternal, meaningless and precious, dust beneath the stars, and yet, somehow, capable of counting those stars, mapping their movements, understanding their patterns. The calendar says it is another day in the endless count. The pyramids say they were built by people like us. The forest says it will outlast us all. And together they whisper the same message the Maya heard in their glory and their downfall. Live wisely. Build beautifully. Understand humbly. For time, like the jungle, is patient. And in the end, time always wins. But what we do with our time, how we mark it, what we build with it, who we become within it, that matters. That always matters. That is eternal, even when everything else is dust. The Maya knew this. Now, so do we. The Odyssey is complete. The story is told. Sleep now, if you came for rest, or wake if you came for wonder. Either way, the calendar keeps counting. And tomorrow, as always, the sun will rise again.